This is the first episode in a two-part series. This season covers cases in New Mexico. All season, we're supporting the New Mexico nonprofit Angels Voices Silence No More. Please be sure to listen through the end of the episode for information. This series discusses violence, homicide, crime scenes, autopsy, drug use, and suicide. If you or a loved one is struggling with suicidal thoughts, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255 or call 911 if there's an immediate emergency or crisis. This is The Fall Line. This season, we're covering cases in New Mexico. That choice was originally made because someone reached out. But then we began to speak to more people, and we met lawyer and advocate Darlene Gomez, who represents a number of the families that you'll hear from this season. In fact, there are so many stories to tell that some will continue on into the next season, in November. When we told our friend Eric Carter Londine, he's the brother of Jacob Londine, and we featured updates on their story this July about our New Mexico coverage, he had an immediate reaction. We needed to speak to Vangie Randall Shorty. Eric covered the case of her son, Zachariah Juwaun Shorty, on his own podcast. He knew that Vangie and Zach needed as much attention as possible. And that's because despite Vangie's efforts, and those efforts have been incredible, Zach's case is still unsolved. Zach grew up in a close-knit family and lived in Kirtland, just outside the Navajo Nation reservation in New Mexico. He lived with his mother, Vangie, his father, Myron, his sister, Katrina, and his older brother, Christian, with whom he was especially close. Christian was 4 years older, and Zach looked up to his brother. Zach had a love for art and for hip-hop. He'd eventually teach himself welding and tattooing, and he even began to produce his own music. When he died in July of 2020, at just 23 years old, Zach had already lived a lot of life for someone so young. He was a son, a brother, a father, and he had lots of dreams. Zach was determined to make it in the music business to provide stability for his daughter. He'd been posting tracks for some time, but he wanted to go bigger, make a name for himself. But he was also in trouble. Trouble that his mother, Vangie, tells us that he was desperately trying to get himself out of. And according to Vangie, there are plenty of people in the Kirtland and Farmington, New Mexico areas who knew all about that. Still, 3 years later, she is left without answers. But Vangie Randall Shorty is not a woman who is willing to accept that. There's no resolution, not for her child or for anyone else's child. And so she's been fighting, and she's not going to stop. We first connected with Vangie through Eric over email. I'd later see her at a conference when she was giving a talk titled Silent No More, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives. When she wasn't presenting, she was working at a booth and passing out information on cases. That weekend, Vangie must have given out hundreds of flyers. She handed me a stack for Zach's case, and I carried them to my next stop in Denver. We delayed our first interview for this series by a day because Vangie drove out to aid in a search and flyer effort for Rennell Rose Bennett, who was last seen in Hogback, New Mexico in June of 2020. Then, the next day, on very little sleep, Vangie interviewed with us for more than 3 hours. That is just what Vangie Randall Shorty does, an endless cycle of work for her son and for other people's sons and daughters and their mothers. It's what so many families do, in hopes that they can find answers. Vangie and her supporters and colleagues in the MMIWR and MMIP movement are working at every level, organizing searches, giving speeches, lobbying for legislation, and demanding change. They're working with people like Darlene Gomez, a lawyer and advocate that you'll hear from throughout this season. But without support from law enforcement and government at every level, real, full support, Vangie and other families you'll hear from in these episodes run into roadblock after roadblock. Departments that don't communicate with one another, programs they can't take full advantage of that might have made the difference between a cold case and a resolution. According to Source New Mexico, Vangie is facing a situation familiar to many families of missing and murdered Indigenous people. Quote, the routine and well-known problem of jurisdiction. As the source explained, Zach, quote, lived in Kirtland, New Mexico, was last seen in San Juan County, and his body was found on the Navajo Nation. Regarding Vangie's situation, the reporter wrote, quote, she entered the maze of law enforcement, contacting local police, the county sheriff, and tribal police before being told the FBI took on the case. More than 2 years later, no arrests have been made. Zachariach Juwaun Shorty was last seen alive on Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. He was staying with friends, or people he thought were friends, at the Journey Inn on Airport Drive in Farmington, New Mexico. Zach was there to party, to record some music, and maybe to escape. He had been under a lot of stress. Zach truly longed to get back together with the mother of his daughter. He was facing legal trouble. And if what he told Vangie is true, he was trying to fix some of his problems by informing on local drug activity. It's something that she believes could have led to his death. We told you that Zach disappeared on July 21st. His body was found 4 days later, on Saturday, July 25th. Vangie says it was another 3 days before her family was officially informed. Vangie also says that she heard rumors from the community that Zach had been found, murdered, days before that official information came in. That's how it's been for Vangie as she seeks justice for Zach. Rumors, tips, phone calls, information flowing in that isn't necessarily coming from official sources. She passes everything she can on, and more than that, she has investigated everything that she can herself. But she's still waiting to hear that the person or persons who killed her son are finally going to be held responsible.
So my name is Vangie Randall Shorty, and I was born in Sherbrooke, New Mexico, to Cornelia and Tyler Randall. I am of the Tangled clan and the Red Running into the Water people clan, which is Tkatni Stratni Inchla, Tkatni Bushes Chin. My mom, she was from Little Water, which is on the Navajo reservation. My dad was from Cove, Arizona, also from the reservation. Growing up, my dad was a miner. So my siblings and I, a majority of the time, grew up in Colorado, in the little mining towns. And whenever my dad got laid off, then we would come back to the reservation, to grandma's house, stay there for a couple months until work picked up again. And then our bags were packed and we were out of here again. So I grew up in small communities like Yearvan, Nucla, up until my dad passed away when I was 15. And he had died of cancer. So after dad passed away, we moved back to the reservation. We did have a house there, and I graduated from Sherbrooke High School. After that, my mom had moved out and moved to Kirtland, which is off the reservation, border town, and we all settled here in the Kirtland community. Pretty much have been here since 1993. So I've got 3 children altogether, Christian, Katrina, and Zach. And my 2 older ones were from a previous relationship. And, Zach's dad helped me raise my 2 older children. And we bought a home, and I became a preschool teacher and worked in childcare for about 25 years. I got into that because of my children. I was able to be with them and still work and provide food on the table. And I really didn't need to because Zach's dad was a truck driver. And so, he had good income, but I just felt like I needed to do more and do my part. And there were times that we hardly seen him, maybe for a few minutes in the morning to drop off breakfast and dinner and such. And then he became ill. He became a dialysis patient. His kidneys went out. So he started staying home with the children. I worked 2 jobs and just stuck by his side. Zach and Christian played sports. They were in football. My daughter wasn't so much into sports, just at home. She was, they were very close growing up and did everything together. And they had a good childhood. We took them places and very involved with our kids. Zach, growing up, he played Yaffle for a little bit. He was in the chess club in school. He was a really good kid. He was respectful. He had a good sense of humor, always smiling, laughing. He had a lot of friends. He didn't like the outdoors so much. He was afraid of water, like the swimming pools. He had good grades, did his best. He was a loving person. He was fun. He was goofy. He was a storyteller, told about his days, the things that he experienced every day, added humor to it. He enjoyed being with family. He loved eating. He loved cookouts. He didn't hold grudges. He was a loyal friend. He wasn't afraid to tell you that he loves you and that he cares about you. He wasn't afraid to show it. He enjoyed music, sports. The Raiders and the Panthers were his favorite teams. He enjoyed playing video games such as Madden and Call of Duty. He enjoyed playing with his nephews and nieces. They would throw the ball to each other. He had a close relationship to his grandparents, both my mom and his paternal side. He loved his family. He loved his dad. He cared about him. Dad would end up in the hospital now and then because of his kidneys, and Zach always made sure that he visited. They both enjoyed watching the Raiders play on TV. They both enjoyed watching UFC, watching movies together. He was very helpful. Things that dad couldn't do. He stepped up and he took care of those things, not only for his dad, but his paternal grandparents as well, because they were up there in age. So we used to go out to the farm and he would be up in the trees, trimming the trees for the grandparents, doing yard work for the grandparents. The other thing Zach used to do was he used to feed, the homeless people. If he had a couple of dollars, somebody standing at the corner, he would give them what he had. If he didn't have anything, then he was asking me for a couple of dollars so that he could give it to them, which was fine. I saw my dad do that. And, he would give homeless people money or food. And Zach saw me do that. And it was a beautiful sight to see him do the same thing and care for others. That touches my heart every time I think about those little moments, and people out there remember him for those little things too.
Vangie's children were and are the center of her world. Their well-being is her sole focus. She structured her life around supporting them, even when times were tough. She says that when her older son Christian was in high school and Zach was a preteen, they both ran into issues with local law enforcement. Even though Zach was only in middle school, he was sent to a juvenile detention center. So Vangie made sure that she was there then as often as she could be, too.
He got into middle school and got into some trouble. He ended up in the juvenile detention center and did a year. His brother Christian got into trouble too. And so I would go between the two of them and, visit, because the juvenile detention center was next door to the adult detention center. So I would schedule visits. I never missed a visit unless I had a migraine, and I think that was twice. throughout the whole year. So I was visiting 3 times a week. And I was also there for Zach for his counseling. I never missed anything.
After Zach was released, Vangie said he returned to high school, where he met and fell in love with a girl who would later become the mother of his daughter. Things weren't perfect. Vangie remembers Zach had begun drinking a lot, but he was focused on graduating, and his brother Christian promised that he would be there to support him. That was something that was incredibly important to Zach. He was set to graduate in the spring of 2016, but Christian was killed in a car accident in December of 2015.
And so, as close as they were, his brother had promised that he was gonna be there for graduation. And that was something that they were looking forward to. So graduation came in 2016 of May. Zach took it hard. By that time, his alcohol addiction was, getting out of control. I remember him telling me that he didn't want to walk because Christian wasn't going to be there. And it was a really tough day. It was a tough day on all of us. I was very excited about Zach graduating and very proud of him, all the hard work that he put into it. He had to do a presentation, which he did, on alcohol addiction, drug addiction, and he got a good grade. I was very proud of him because what he experienced, he used toward that.
Zach had to walk the stage without his brother there to see him graduate. And though he was struggling with that immense loss and what Vangie describes as increasing issues with drug and alcohol use, he had joy too. His daughter.
His baby was born in January, and he had a little girl. Gosh, he was so happy. And he named her after his brother, which was very nice. She's got a beautiful name. When his daughter was born, they weren't living together right away, but he would go and visit the baby, as often as he could. He would stay a night or two. He would sing to her, just hold her and sing to her and dance with her. And gosh, those moments were so beautiful. He loved his daughter so much. We often took her to the park and they would play. She brought out the kid in him. And he would be on the swings with her, sliding down the slide with her, chasing her through the park. He was a good dad. He was a good dad. And now they call her Shorty. They call her Shorty after her dad because people knew Zach as Shorty or Juwaun. I look back at her now and she looks so much like her dad, and she's got a lot of his traits. She loves music. She's got that sense of humor that he has. But so she was born. He got a job across where we lived in Kirtland, and he became a tire tech there for desert mountain trucking. And he was living with his girlfriend for a little bit, and he would go to work. He'd stop by every morning because I would have breakfast in the microwave for him. So, she would make breakfast, but he would come by and have breakfast again. And he would go to work. So for lunchtime, he would stop at the house. The doors were always open for him. He would stop by at the house and have lunch there and, go back to work. But he would challenge himself there, and he would time himself to see how fast he could get those tires done, because, the truckers were in and out. And so he would try to get them out of there as fast as he could. His other interest, like I said before, was welding, which he was learning through the mother of his daughter. Her dad was a welder, so he was showing him and teaching him. He really enjoyed it. He enjoyed that. He also enjoyed tattooing. He did a few on me as well. So I've got a horse. I've got the weeping angel.
Can I ask, how did he learn that craft?
He got his first tattoo, and after that he was addicted to it. And so he ordered himself a tattoo gun and just started practicing on himself as well. And then he had friends who were like, hook me up and I want a tattoo. So he started practicing on his friends, but he started practicing. And then as he got better, he was like, Mom, you want a tattoo? And I was like, sure. And he did a good job. His other talent was making music. He would buy the software, download it on his laptop, which had the beats already, and so he would come up with the lyrics himself. And those lyrics were his experiences with the loss of his brother and his drug and alcohol addiction. And I was a very supportive mom. And I just, I tried to help him in as many ways as I could. So if he picked up a new hobby, I was there. And I just remember hearing the words of some of the songs and gosh, just feeling the pain behind it. And it still gets me when I listen to his YouTube channel. I hear the pain in his voice, and now just hearing his voice, that's all I have. All I have are memories. He gained so many friends through his music. I know that he had talked about a small local producer that was interested in his music, but nothing ever happened. He lost his job at the Desert Mountain Tire, the trucking company, and he went to work for Speedway just down the road from where we live. He met a lot of people through there. People still remember him, and they approached me, hey, your son was a good kid. They knew that he was fighting battling his addictions. And with Zach's addictions, I would get after him for some of the things that he does. Like, for instance, if he got off work at Speedway, I would pick him up and he would come out with shots. And I'm like, Juwaun, you don't need that. When are you going to stop? Just things like that. And so I would be voicing my concerns to him on our way back home. And then I'd get a phone call from a parent and I'd be like, hi, this is Miss Vangie, in a sweet little voice. And and he would look at me like, who the are you right now? Like, and then I hang up the phone with the parent and then I get back onto yelling at him again. Zach's drug and alcohol addiction got the best of him. And I stayed in tune with him. I became very observant, listened, became very aware. And it's something that you learn, even learning how to tune out different noises to focus on him, because my bedroom was on one end of the house and his was on the other. And I noticed that he was becoming suicidal whenever anniversaries of his brother's death would come up or his brother's birthday would come up. Those days hit harder.
Zach attempted to take his own life on one of those anniversaries, and Vangie managed to talk him into seeking inpatient care for help. But getting him to stay in the hospital for care, that was a struggle. Zach left San Juan Regional almost as soon as he was checked in, and he had to be convinced to return inside.
They took him straight to the back, put him in the room where they locked him in. He was under observation. Within the hour, they flew him out to Albuquerque, where he was being diagnosed, and he was allowed to have his phone an hour. So he would call his daughter and her mom, and he would call me. He would say, I saw a blue car just like yours, Mom. I can't wait to come home. I'm sorry. I miss you. I want to do better. Mom, please get me out of here. Things like that. And of course, McDonald's was just within view. And he's like, I want some McDonald's. And I just, told him, you know what, baby, you can do better. Your daughter needs you. I need you. I love you. We got this. I was his biggest fan in everything he did. I would pick him up from work and he would lean his head on my shoulder and he would tell me, Mom, you're my best friend. You're my best friend, Mom. I'd pat him, tell him I love him. And one day I told him, I love you unconditionally, Juwaun. And he says, what does that even mean? And I told him that no matter what, even though he was a pain in my ass, that through his drug and his alcohol addiction, I love him.
Before Zach ever left for treatment, Vangie discovered that he'd gotten in trouble with law enforcement once again. She knew about his struggle with drugs, but not that he'd become more directly involved. According to the Farmington Times, in August of 2019, Zach was caught in an undercover drug sting. Per the Times, Zach was arrested on, quote, multiple drug trafficking charges for selling meth to an undercover agent, including a purchase aided by a woman who allegedly conducted a drug deal in the parking lot of her employer.
I found out that he started selling meth and he got caught. There were charges against him, and that scared me because those were serious charges, where he could go to prison for it. And I talked to him and, about the route he was taking in life, about his daughter, how important she was to him, how important Zach was to me, and telling him that I didn't want to go back to visiting him. I didn't want to lose him to the system. So he was under surveillance by the Region 2 narcotics here in San Juan County. So I don't know how long they were observing him. I worked from 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. when we closed. I also stayed late some days to catch up on paperwork. And so the drug charges were a shock to me. And I was at work one day and his dad called me frantically saying that Zach got picked up. And I'm like, what the hell? What the hell? I rushed home and they had actually both gotten picked up and taken. And they were brought to one of the little stations here in Kirtland, the sheriff's station.
Per the Farmington Daily Times, Zach's father was arrested because he'd driven Zach to and from the location where the deal took place. He was then charged with conspiracy to commit trafficking of a controlled substance. With both Zach and his dad in custody, Vangie had no way to figure out exactly where they'd been taken.
I had no idea where they were. I thought they were taken up to the detention center in Farmington. And so I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I was lost. And I went and immediately, called for prayer. Then they both get dropped back to the house. They got taken to be interviewed, is what had happened. And so with Zach, how he had described it was that he was taken to the sheriff's department by a sheriff. When they took him to the room, there was at least 4 or 5 men there. And he described it as being you only see these in the movies, he said. They were there and they all had like a ski mask on so they couldn't be identified. And they were asking him questions about what they saw, asking him questions about other drug dealers in the area. And he said, he was so freaked out. They take him back home and they drop him back off. Dad experienced the same thing, dropped him back off as well. I was scared, I was like, the hell did you guys get yourself into? And, he stayed home for weeks. Like I said, it scared the shit out of him. And I'm assuming that he thought maybe things calmed down and that was the end of it. And so I don't know if they went out to sell again. I'm not sure what happened, but next thing you know, I believe dad was at dialysis. Zach had a female friend at the house. He had friends coming all the time, day and night. Daytime, I had no control over because I was at work, but dad would call me and tell me, there's a blue truck here or there's a gray car here. And so I would call Zach and tell him who's there, they can't stay, they need to go. And so they would leave. But that's the only control I had while I was at work. And nighttime, after I go to bed, people would be pulling into the driveway. Zach would go out there. I don't know what they would do. I'd wake up and I'd tell them they had to leave. So I was doing that all hours of the night and, getting onto him, getting onto his friends, hey, I work. You guys can't be doing this. Those are some of the things that I had experienced with him. But there was a day where I was at work. His dad was in dialysis. Zach was home. He had a female friend there. And the Region 2 narcotics showed up again. And they were pounding on the door. And he called me. He says, Mom, they're here. I'm like, who's there? He says, Region 2 narcotics. He says, what do I do? I said, open the door. What do they want? He says, I don't know. And he opened the door. They ended up arresting him, handcuffing him immediately. And this time they didn't have their mask on, but they took him, they arrested him. After that, the charges were made.
According to the Farmington Daily Times, Zach was eventually convicted and given probation for that charge. His father was also given probation.
Zach stayed home. He had to check in. He stayed home after that. Of course, he was still using, he was still drinking, and he didn't go out. He didn't go out with friends. Then all of a sudden, he says, I'm going to go make music with some friends. I picked him up the early morning hours of July 21st, and he was with that female friend, and her initials are KB. So he was with KB, and when I picked him up, and he was expecting to come home with her. And I said no. I said no because, for one, they're both under the influence of drugs and alcohol. And when they're under the influence, they'll be fine for a while, then they start arguing. And I didn't want that happening. And it's happened before, with his dad being in dialysis, he can't, there's only so much that he could handle. So as we were going home, he asked, can I take KB home with us? I said, no.
Vangie dropped Zach and his friend off in town and headed home so she could sleep for a few hours before work. That morning, which was Tuesday, July 21st, Zach's dad had a dialysis appointment. When Vangie got up, he was already gone for his treatment. Vangie was rushing to get ready for work when Zach called. He wanted her to pick him up and bring him back to the house before she went into the preschool, but he wanted to bring KB too, and Vangie was not okay with that.
I said, no. And he says, why? I said, well, your dad's not home. He's in dialysis. I'm going to work. No, you can't be here together alone. And I told him, you guys fight, you guys argue, and I don't need that. So he says, let me call you back. A few minutes later, he calls me back and he says, well, can you take us to the Journey Inn? I'm going to continue working on my music. And I said, okay. And I said, I'm going to leave here in a few minutes. I'll come pick you guys up. Be ready. And I did. I picked him up July 21st, 2020. And I took him to the Journey Inn in Farmington. Room 129 is the room that they walked into. I kept texting him and reminding him. He was responding, and then eventually the text messages stopped in the afternoon. So I figured, he's working on his music. And then about 3, he calls me from a different phone number, and it was a friend's number, a male that was in the room that night, that was in the room with him. There was 2 males and 2 females in the room. He says, "Mom, my battery died. Can you bring me a charger?" And I said, "Okay." I did. And I left the work. The journey in was about 5 minutes just down the road. So I took the charger to him. He came out, and I could see that he was intoxicated, and he didn't have his shoes on. I remember his pants being rolled up. And I said, "Here's your charger. Be careful. Are you okay?" He says, "Yes, I'm okay." I said, "Okay, well, charge up your phone. I love you. Please be careful." And I made sure he went back into the room before I drove off. And I went back to work. I also told him that I get off at 6. And I went back to work.
After Vangie got off work, she went by Little Caesars to get Zach and his friends some food. He also asked her to pick up the girl, KB, that he'd been seeing, and to bring her back to the Journey Inn where he'd been staying. Vangie wanted to check in on him again, so she agreed.
We pull up in front of room 129, and Zach is standing outside on the phone, and he's talking to the mother of his child. And the other female, KB, gets out of the vehicle, and I get out, and he's on the phone, and he was upset, and he's telling her, "I love you." Like I said, he's on the phone with the mother of his child. "I love you. I want to make it work," and KB over here, when she's with Zach, she's assuming that she's in a relationship with him.
Vangie was worried about which way things might go, especially with Zach so emotional. She knew that she needed to diffuse things, so when Zach asked her to speak with his daughter's mother, she did. Vangie promised that she would talk to Zach, but he needed to be in a better state of mind to process what she had to say.
I hung up the phone, gave it back to Zach, and I said, "Juwaun, do you want to come home? Let's go home." He says, "No, I want my family back." And I said, "You know what you need to do. You know what you need to do." He had to get clean. He had to get sober. And he says, "Okay, Mom, let me finish this track and I'll be home." I said, "Okay, I brought you pizza. I brought some sodas. Call me when you're done." I gave him a hug, and I told him that I love him. And he went back in the room, and I left. And that was the last time I seen my baby. I go home. I constantly check up on him when he's not home, constantly calling him or texting him to see if he's okay. After losing Christian, I became very overprotective. And there was times when, like, in the middle of the night, I just wake up and I'm like, I call him and he'll answer. The next day when he comes home, we talk, and he says, "Mom, how do you know these things? I was about to do something stupid and you called me." And I would tell him, "You know what? I carried you. I carried you in my womb. It's that love that I have for you. It's that connection that we have." And he would come home safely. He would come home, but he would always question me, like, "How do you know? How do you know?" As a mom, you just know these things. You do. Going back to that night, he didn't answer me before I went to bed. So I just assumed that he was in the middle of making his music. And I went to bed, and it was about 11:30. My phone is ringing. When I went to bed, my phone is always next to me because I just never know when Zach is going to call me. He would call me to get picked up 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And I would go and I would pick him up and I would bring him home And I was that mom, you know. So I get this phone call through my messenger, and it's KB. And she says, Zach stepped out to smoke a cigarette and did not come back in the room. And I said, what the hell? Where is he? Can you go out and look for him? And call me right back. So I hung up the phone with her. I called Zach's phone immediately. He didn't answer. She answered his phone. And so I asked her, is he back? Did you find him? And she says, no. That was a red flag that he didn't have his phone on him.
It just didn't make sense to Vangie. Zach always had his phone. Even if he'd planned to just step outside for a cigarette, he would have taken it with him. And though he was worried about probation and the police, she did not think that he had any plans of running away from his troubles. All Zach had taken with him to the journey in that day was a book bag. He had his computer, his folders, and his phone. He had no money, but even if he had, he wouldn't have left his daughter behind, or his family, and he was in no state to do so. When Vangie had seen him earlier in the evening, he hadn't even been wearing shoes. Zach did not have a car, and he knew he could call his mom if he needed a ride, even if he was intoxicated. And Vangie says that he would have called. He always did. He would have, if he could have. And that is what frightened her the most. Vangie was certain that if Zach disappeared from the journey in, it would have been against his will. And based on what she knew about his arrests and his ties to the drug world, Vangie was terrified about who might be involved. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $10,000 for information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the individuals responsible for the death of Zachariah Juwaun Shorty. If you have information in Zach's case, call the FBI at 505-889-1300 or submit information online at tips.fbi.gov. Next time on The Fall Line, Zach's story continues with his family's search, the discovery of his murder, and the jurisdictional roadblocks they faced as they seek justice for him and so many others. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. This season, we're supporting Angels Voices Silence No More, a New Mexico-based nonprofit funded by our friend Eric Carter Londine, the brother of Jacob Londine. According to their mission statement, Angels Voices' goal is to, quote, empower families by providing them with the necessary resources and referrals to advocate for their missing or murdered loved ones. We believe in taking a comprehensive approach to support, encompassing a wide range of services, including billboards, DNA testing, private investigations, funeral expenses, therapy, and much more. Our goal is to ensure that no family faces these challenges alone. Listeners, you can join us in donating to their mission. And if you can't donate right now, that is okay. Sharing their charitable initiatives would be a huge help. You can find all the relevant links in our show notes. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified persons cases, is out everywhere. It's a hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books. Find out more through the link in our show notes. If you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove. Produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Brandy C. Williams and Vic Kennedy. And, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka.